Okay. All right. So once again, this is Frederick Jones, the founder of MyFootprint.com and the creator of Saturday AM, publisher of Saturday AM and Afternoon WebEx, and Well Read, which is both which is a digital manga magazine that comes out every 2 weeks. Many of you are very familiar with it. We also have Afternoon WebEx, which is our daily webcomic experience, as well as Well Read, which is our ebook line. All three of them have been doing fantastic. We're growing tremendously. We're less than a year old, and we started this weekly Saturday via Google Hangout to talk to some of the newest and most ambitious creators in the realm of webcomics and manga. And so we're really pleased to have currently Brandon M. Easton, who is a major figure, one of the biggest figures that we've ever had on this show. Brandon is a writer who dates back to the late 90s, early 2000s, working on such incredibly licensed content as Transformers. But he currently also is having worked on shows like THUNDERCATS and the newest THUNDERCATS series that just came out. And he's also a director. We'll be talking about his latest directorial effort, which is a fantastic documentary on fantasy fiction writers. But first and foremost, let's just give a shout out to Brandon Easton, who's taking some time out of his very busy schedule to join us this evening. Brandon, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Absolutely. Well, again, everyone, we do want to apologize first to Brandon as well as to those of you who joined us for about 20 minutes ago. We actually tried to do this, and we had some people who jumped on and were being disrespectful, and we had some technical problems with it. Obviously, we're not a gigantic company. We're using this technology that comes from Google. So, Google itself has problems at times, but certainly the fact that we make this thing public so that many people can come join us, and we picked up some hoodlums tonight. But I would ask that if you do join us, please, this is a fantastic person we're talking to this evening, a lot of knowledge to share, so please make sure you come on, be respectful, mute your microphone when you join us. And then likewise, if you do have questions for Brandon, we will be making questions for Brandon available as we do for every Saturday Q&A. And basically, when you get ready to ask a question, either activate the Q&A app on the Google Hangout application that you may be using, or just use the chat window, whichever one you have access to, and put a question together, and we will answer it in due time. So we're planning to go for about an hour, assuming there's no hiccups. And so, again, let's jump right into it with Brandon. Now, Brandon, you said this before last time, but why don't we just, again, start with that real quickly. Tell everybody what your background is with writing and how you got started into this field.
Okay, well, originally I broke in with superstar artist Pat Lee's Dreamwave Comics, which, around the late 90s was pretty much the biggest independent company on the scene. And one of the things they did to really make some noise was they got the rights to, they licensed the Transformers and made a comic book out of it. And the craziest thing was that comic outsold X-Men for about 5 straight months. And if you were a long time, or if you are a long time comic book head, you know that pretty much from the 80s straight through to the end of the 90s, the X-Men books were #1 for about 15 straight years. So when this upstart company with a licensed property came out of the blue and just, killed the industry for 5 months straight, it definitely made a difference in how people viewed their company, and Dreamwave got on the map and people started taking them seriously. And during that time, I was just kind of hanging around. A friend of mine was LaShawn Thomas, who now is one of the biggest animators pretty much in the country, if not the world. And he had told me that Dreamwave was starting their own thing because they put all this money into licensed properties. But when you spend money on licensed properties, even if you make a lot of it, you got to give it right back to the person that owns the license. So they wanted to make some stuff so they can make their own money. And that was where I got in. He told me they were working on a supernatural ninja spy action adventure comic, and I'd thrown some ideas together, and it looked like a lot of other people said no, so I was the last one on the list, and that's pretty much how I broke in.
And that's like you said, that was such an amazing period because that was, for people who don't know, Transformers came out in the 1980s. It was a Marvel Comics. It was huge back in the 1980s. Most comics were, though, pretty big back in the 1980s, but it was really big moment. And then it went dormant. It just didn't exist anymore alongside of G.I. Joe. And so for Dreamwave to come into the field, they were an independent comic company. They were not Image, they were not Marvel or DC or Dark Horse at the time, which were probably the biggest companies at that moment. For them to come in and, as you said, challenge X-Men, which was a force back in the 90s,
absolutely,
in the 2000s, that is an amazing thing. But the fact as well that we have the licensing experience in comic books today that we have, we're talking like companies like IDW and Boom Studios, who literally, probably wouldn't quite be exactly where they are if they didn't have licensed content to help power them through a few of their early years. We wouldn't have that without what Dreamwave did. So that's such an amazing piece of comic book history, and you were a part of that, not to mention with Sean Thomas. So take us from where you went there to how you ended up where you are now, where you're working on toy lines and animated shows. Kind of walk us through how you got there.
Okay. Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll keep it as short as possible. Basically what happened was after Dreamwave started to fall apart, I couldn't get any work anywhere in the industry, and it kind of flew in the face of what I had been told, which was break in, get some books with your name on it, and you can get hired at Marvel and DC somehow. And that didn't happen. That didn't come close to happening. Things were pretty tough, and from 2004 to 2012, I couldn't get anybody to spit in my direction. So it was a tough time, and during that period was when I had started putting together my own original graphic novel property called Shadow Law. So what wound up happening was I wound up hiring and firing 8 different art teams over the course of about 6 to 7 years of production. So it looked like at one point that my entire comic book / writing career was pretty much over. And it wasn't until I moved to LA in 2008 and basically paid every due I could and scraped and scrambled and suffered as much as a person could without getting killed. I eventually got Shadow Law out, and then things started to change for the better.
So several points that I want to touch on. So, and obviously, like you said, it's a long story, and I've been privy to hear some of it from you. But given the fact that Saturday AM, that we do feature so many people who follow us and have helped us grow, who are indeed want to be creators themselves, writers and or artists or both. So let's talk a bit, or let's unpack a bit about the idea, what you stated about how the traditional means of comic book production at that time of starting period comic books. And again, let's preface this, at that time, which we're talking early 2000s. I mean, the world has changed dramatically since the early 2000s, but in that period, a handful of comic companies. The idea was that you produce a comic book and you kind of get your name out there. The comic book is out there, particularly if it's something like Transformers that was doing such big business back then. And then you kind of can not write your ticket, but you can start to get your foot in the door. The same way, like if in Hollywood, you start appearing on a couple of TV shows or guest spots or whatever, and then eventually casting agents start looking for you. That was the idea about the way the industry was supposed to work back then, and and then obviously you said it didn't or did not go that way for you. Do you think that was due to? I mean, obviously Saturday AM, our entire culture is the fact that we are a multicultural environment. We have a lot of creators of different ethnicities, different nationalities, different gender. Do you think that had anything to do with race, or do you think that was just kind of like the nature of the beast with how insular the comic industry is?
Wow. Trying to figure out where to start. Okay. Well, do you want to get more specific? Like, do you have one particular question out of that? Like, do you really want to deal with?
Well, I mean, let's just shoot the race thing. I mean, do you think race had something to do with that?
Okay. Well, okay. I think that the industry is really based on cronyism. With nepotism, where people hire their buddies.
Yeah.
The problem is that the core constituency and the core administrative demographic of the industry are white guys, and their friends are also white guys.
Right.
So what winds up happening is they only hire white guys.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how accomplished you are. It doesn't matter what you've achieved. If you're not in that circle, if you're not, part of their little clique or their crew, you're not going to get past go.
Right.
And that's really what the issue is. I mean, there are instances where there are people who are straight out racist who don't want to hire blacks. There are people like that out there. There's many stories about them behind closed doors. I've dealt with one of them personally in my life. Mm-hmm. So I know for a fact that there's some stuff going on that people don't want to talk about, but there are situations that have existed. However, really what a black or any really person of color, but particularly what a black creator has to do is sell a lot of comics. Mm-hmm. And Chris Rock about 2 weeks ago, I mean he said this a long time ago, but I just saw Chris Rock say this about 2 weeks ago. He says, if you're going up against the white power structure, you can't get a win from the judges. You got to knock the guy out.
Right.
There's no judges victory. There's no points win because the system is rigged, period. And whether or not there are people in the system who are, openly racist or not, or even there are people who are completely not racist or not prejudiced or bigoted, but they benefit simply by being white from the system.
Right.
So they don't even have to do anything to win.
Right.
So that's what you're seeing a lot of, where you'll have black creators who...
You there, Brandon? Brandon, your audio popped off again. You there? Brandon, if you can hear me, check your audio, your microphone, see if you can flip that back on. Brandon? All right, everyone, we do apologize. We had a bit of a technical issue there with Brandon's microphone. We had experienced it a little earlier in the first go-around with this, and it may have happened again. We'll give Brandon a few moments to get that situation ferreted out. To the point of what Brandon was saying, and obviously we want to get back to that conversation as soon as we can. Obviously, I want to unpack that more from Brandon to get his perspective on that. That's not per se anything that we, the people of Saturday AM, have any knowledge of. Many of us are amateurs in the world of comics. I can say I've certainly experienced a bit of what Brandon's talking about in the video game industry, so I don't think it's what he's saying is out of line. More importantly, the industry as a whole has been taken to task for the same behavior as it relates to women. There are very few women creatives in comics, so I think this is probably a very apt conversation that Brandon's having, and probably making some very apt points about this. But regardless, we'd like to explore this a bit more with Brandon, and also talk about the experiences that he has with his new work. So let's just take a moment and see if Brandon comes back on here. I believe he just joined us back. Brandon, are you there?
Yeah, it just dropped out.
Oh, okay. Well, so I was just kind of walking people through the fact your mic had probably cut out on us just for a second. So, so you were saying, and while you were gone, let me just say real quickly that what I told everyone was that, I know some people obviously when it comes to the subject of race get a little bent out of shape, and I was saying that, me as an African American and what I started with my footprint, I spent a decade in the video game industry. I can certainly confirm a lot of what you're saying in the video game that happened in the video game industry. And happened to me in the video game industry. I can also state that if we look at what's happening in the news right now, there is a minor, and I would say very minor, controversy about the biggest tech companies, everybody from Google to Apple to Twitter and all these various companies who have almost a less than 5% acknowledgement of minorities in positions of authority, or any position at all within these corporations that all of us utilize. And at the same time also have a dearth of women. So this is something that is very prevalent. So again, some people might get bent out of shape about it, but this is something that is prevalent, it is real, and so we're just talking about it from that perspective. So, but go ahead, you were saying that, so there were those forces that you saw and whether or not they were even racist, they still would find themselves benefiting from that structure, which still kept out minorities.
And was that the last part you heard?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So basically what I was saying is, again, there are people who I know, white guys and women, who are decent folks. They're not disgusting human beings who, just by the virtue of being white, have had the ability to get past the gatekeepers. And it's very disconcerting because, like I said before, you have black guys and women who have TV credits, film credits, have publishing, incredible publishing, portfolios, so forth and so on, but they just can't get a break because the people in power just won't take them seriously. And then there's also those
get a break in comics?
And comic books, yes, specifically. Yeah. When it comes to animation and all that stuff, that's a whole different ballgame because the bar, surprisingly, is actually much lower to get into television than it is to comics, which is very bizarre. That's a whole different conversation. But specifically for the comic book industry, there's a lot of issues.
Right. So, okay, well, so then looking at what we've got there then, so we're having obviously, there's obviously a lot of stuff there in terms of what you experienced from the aspect of the comic industry. But, obviously now you're in a position where you're writing animation, TV shows, you're producing documentaries. So walk us through, if you don't mind, about your experiences in the realm of animation. So how did you get started in animation? You've got some big credits, I might add, as well. Transformers, THUNDERCATS. So talk to us about animation.
Well, with animation, and I'm glad we segued into that one. Animation is an interesting place to be right now because if you don't like superhero stuff and you like comedy, this is the time to make your short comedy films, animated-wise, or your short, crazy Adventure Time type stuff. That's the stuff that's really hot right now. There's not a lot of boys action adventure shows, and the reason they call it that is because, and I want to say this to everybody listening, if you don't know too much about how the industry is set up, there's something called 4 quadrants. Are adult male, adult female, boy, and girl. So basically a show like Young Justice or Teen Titans Go or whatever, even though they have a large female viewership, it's still considered to be a boys action adventure show. And so advertisers will say, well, we're not going to put any money toward it because there's not enough boys watching, even though there are a lot of girls watching who do spend money. Right. So right now, because of the success of stuff like Adventure Time and other crazy shows like that, you're not seeing as much superhero boys action adventure stuff going on. Now, I got in because of connections I made from graduate school. And I went through a lot of channels, and it took a while. I mean, I'm giving you about 3 years worth of action in about 30 seconds. But basically, the reality of the situation is that I hooked up with the right people, and I made a spec script, which is a sample script based on a TV show, Batman Brave and the Bold, who the guy who was the showrunner of that was also the showrunner or executive producer of the THUNDERCATS reboot. So he liked what I did, and over the course of a few years, I kept hitting him up over and over again. And then eventually he, got back to me and hired me to do an episode.
So so THUNDERCATS, you use the connection, but you were able to. But obviously, you had obviously this came after the work you had done in Transformers and things like that.
Well, it came after my comic book work. THUNDERCATS was my first Hollywood job ever.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I was saying. But this still came, though. I mean, for people who are thinking like, oh, hell, I can go to school and then get an animation. No, this came after. This came after you had actually done some commercial, like you said with the Chris Rock quote, some commercial comic book work that had done well.
Yes, exactly.
And so, so you got into animation, and so again, for our fans who would love to be in animation, and I'm sure we have quite a few of those people who would love to be in animation. What would you say are the key differences? Obviously, we discussed some of the political arrangements, but what are the key differences in terms of the work for comic books versus animation? Obviously, there are a lot of creators, and I'm thinking of some very famous creators during the Bruce Timm era of animation. So I'm thinking of people like James Tucker?
Yes.
Yeah, James Tucker and Dwayne McDuffie, even
Yes.
voice casting directors like Andrea Romano. You know, you have all these really powerful names, women, men, people of color who are in these positions. What is that situation like? Is it, you know, the one rap on Hollywood that I guess is similar to comic books is the idea that, you know, you get in, you get a gig, that the gig doesn't the gig doesn't work, then you're out of a job, or if the gig gets canceled or gets syndication, you're out of a job, you got to find something else.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I will say this much. It's not that Hollywood is quote unquote much better than the comic book industry, but in my opinion, you have more people who've lived life. You have more people who are used to diverse environments and diverse people. There are. Let me also correct something else.
Yeah.
There are a lot of black people working in the Hollywood film and television industry. There's not a lot of black writers, although there are quite a few, but the majority of writers are white. But there's a lot of black people working in the industry in a lot of different, areas, like in makeup, and post-production, and pre-production, and above the line production. I mean, there's all these. I mean, the industry is not, and this is not to you, but to many listeners, the industry is not just actors and actresses.
Right.
There are thousands of people, tens of thousands of people you never get to see who are vitally important to the creation and maintenance of the Hollywood film and television industry. So, and there's a lot of black people doing that. So I want to make sure folks understand that side of it. However, with the writing side, if you have quality work, right? If your script is literally better than other scripts, you're going to get a job.
Right.
I mean, it's just the way it goes. Now, whether or not you continue to work is a whole different ball game.
Right.
However, you can get it. The entry level is much, much easier for blacks to break in. To stay in is a whole different ball game.
And so, and you would you put that down to just again like just the nature of the way that's set up and how difficult? I mean, film and TV tends to work on cycles, whereas comic books, if you create a cool comic book, that's a job that as long as you've got a decent sized audience, that lasts forever. But you mentioned, for example, a few minutes ago, you mentioned Young Justice. Young Justice was an excellent show, had tremendous fan base around the world, and but yet didn't last.
Well, the reason why Young Justice didn't last is the same reason why Green Lantern and Thundercats and Tron Uprising didn't last. They are based on toy sales. And the problem was the toys and well, first of all, I mean, this is a long story too. When you really look at it, the marketing and time slots of those shows were not ideal. Also, a lot of these shows are based upon ancillary sales. So if a show like Thundercats didn't sell action figures, did not, it's not going to last. A show like Adventure Time, which gets good ratings, but also sells hundreds of millions of dollars in ancillary materials, that show's not going to go anywhere. Young Justice might have sold a few DVDs, but I'm going to say this. A lot of fans, so-called fans, kill their favorite shows by bootlegging them. You know, like Young Justice is one of those shows that was heavily bootlegged and torrented and blah, 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 BitTorrent and all that stuff. And guess what? When you do that, the show makes no money and it gets canceled. You see all these anime fans who BitTorrent Naruto and all this other stuff, and they get mad when stuff doesn't come out. But guess what? It's your fault that these shows got canceled.
So okay, so actually, I want to interject here for a second because I've been wanting to talk to someone in animation about this, and I'm sure our fans want to ask as well. Let me also state as well, if you have questions, please submit them for Brandon in the Q&A app or utilize the chat window. You're talking to someone here with Brandon who has tremendous experience across comics and animation, and we're going to talk about his directorial documentary effort here in a moment. But I've been dying to talk to someone in animation. In fact, we're trying to set up an interview with Greg Weisman, and we'll have this conversation with him if we can get a chance to talk. He's agreed to it. We got to work out the details. Greg Weisman, if you all don't know, is the creator of Gargoyles, the animated show Gargoyles. He also did Spectacular Spider-Man, and he did the show in question, Young Justice. So here's the thing I do not understand about the animation industry. Now, I am as fiery as you are, the way that you just sounded. I am as fiery as you are, and I tell our fans this. I tell our creators this. that I'm very anti-scanlation, and I've been very upfront about this. We have ads out there talking about don't scanlate, read WebEx or read.
Right.
You know, I'm very bullish about this. I do not understand the animation industry, though. That I do not understand why that sort of fire exists, and for two reasons. One, like you gave the example of Naruto. Naruto's not in danger because Naruto no one in America gave a damn about having a soccer mom in San Francisco when they because I was a part of this whole thing with the animation movement back in the early 2000s. That's when I was at the height of my power in the video game industry, and I remember sitting on some of these meetings and, like, you know, some soccer mom who's in charge, quote unquote, of the product management of Naruto, and is getting to sit in on some of the meetings where they're talking about, okay, how do we bring Naruto to America? You know, it's got violence and stuff.
Right.
And like, well, yeah, we got to make one guy have like a cowboy voice because, you know, my kid loved Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Stuff like that is why I have no sympathy for the animation industry, because they allow themselves for a certain period of time to do stupid things and let people who have no business interfering with animation interfere with animation. Back to the point that you raised about, hey, and also perhaps then therefore keeping out people who actually probably could have helped the animation movement move forward, whether they were people of color or so on and so forth, putting friends and friends of friends in positions of power to influence how animation was perceived in America. So one, I have no sympathy for the animation industry. Two, what exactly, like, for example, why is it that Naruto can do well in Japan, and, you know, and yes, it has its own metrics in terms of success, but then we have an animation property here like Young Justice. You made the point about, well, you know, it's got to be, you know, when people bootleg it and torrent it, why is DC, why is Cartoon Network not saying, hey, you know what, we know this property could do well, so just release it everywhere. We'll create advertising on every single vehicle possible, but if it needs to be on Hulu, put it on Hulu, put it on Netflix, put it on Cartoon Network, put it on, you know, but do it all at the same time so that however people get it, they're going to get some advertising with it, and we'll make our money via advertising and then other types of ancillary stuff. Because to your point, when you have a show that is older, the way Young Justice was in terms of its storylines, well, of course it's not going to sell toys, right? I mean, it's like the audience there is not worried about toys. They're already buying toys.
Okay.
Do you get my point? Like, why is that?
Okay. All right, well, see, all right, another thing is Japanese animation and American animation, those are two very separate industries. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the difference between American football and Canadian football. I mean, it seems to look the same, but it's not the same, you know? So the CFL is not the NFL by any stretch. Now, this is my point, right?
Yeah.
The American animation model is very much based upon ancillary sales. Advertising time, whatever advertising time they sold, was not enough to keep the show around because animation costs are ridiculously high. Period. You know, Japan has massive manga sales and a bunch of other things going on for it that we simply don't. So my point was that when you don't have the ratings that, you know, you need to attract advertisers to pay for your show to continue to be made, you know, which is because, you know, TV is simply about advertising. That's all it's about. Selling advertising space. That's just it, right? So if you have a show that has, let's say, 1 million viewers, right, but only 250,000 of them actually watch the show when it's on, guess what happens? Show gets canceled because the other 750,000 are streaming it, bootlegging it, downloading it illegally, doing all this stuff. That does affect it. You know, the idea of Naruto being, you know, vetted by, you know, the parents' resource group or whatever, and TV standards and practices, that's going to happen for anything. But Young Justice had the ability to tell extremely powerful and impactful stories in 22 minutes, or actually more like 18 to 20 minutes. You know, and despite that, the fans who were all mad when it got canceled, these same fans were not showing up when the show was on the air in first run. You know, and that's what I'm saying, that if you bootleg a show, you know, Game of Thrones is the most bootlegged show on earth. However, HBO, right? HBO has the ability to set it up a certain way where they're not really affected because the Blu-ray and DVD sales are still high because the fans are still supporting it. You know, people aren't buying, you know, for every guy that buys one of the Young Justice, you know, sets, another 10 to 15 are downloading them illegally. So the money simply isn't there. And that's what I'm getting at. And that's one of the reasons why you have this weird disparity.
So we'll have to come back to that. I mean, like, you know, I get what you're saying. Like I said, I still have issues with that. I mean, you look at a show like Bleach, for example, and the new version of Toonami. Bleach is an old show. These are not new episodes. It's still getting a higher rating, you know, than other shows. And I guess.
I mean, well, we could explain that because Bleach, stuff like Bleach, tends to really connect with female cosplaying audiences. The female cosplaying demographic can single-handedly keep a show on the air because they're really into that Bishonen look of the guys that look like women. I don't know what that's about, but they really like that. And that kind of thing. Plus, once again, you made an excellent point. Bleach is already produced overseas by someone else. Toonami is licensing it.
Right.
So a lot of the money for advertising is very well directed. They know exactly who they're getting.
Right.
Any show that's already packaged and done and is being shown as is being stripped as a licensed show is very different than a show that costs ridiculous amounts of money that American money is paying for.
Okay. So
that's what the difference is.
Well, so excellent. Like I said, well, I appreciate that. We're going to definitely explore some of that as well with Greg Weissman, but that's a definite insight there to pick up. We have two questions just that came in as well. And so we'll do them real quickly, and then we'll move on because I want to get to your documentary, and then we'll also come back to talk some more about just your creation and stuff like that, and stuff you're doing now. So real quickly, Brandon Gresbine, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Brandon. Now his question is somewhat similar, to what we just talked about, but you seem to touch a nerve with that conversation. He says, regarding downloading torrents for shows, how does the industry work with services such as Hulu as far as the views the shows get?
Oh, right. Hulu pays for that.
Right.
Hulu doesn't get it for free. Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Instant, and upcoming Yahoo, which picked up Community Season 6, they all pay the people who made it for the right to show it. It's not like you make a TV show and Hulu just says, hey, I want to show that. See, this is what I really want to reiterate. And this is specifically for anybody not understanding the nature of the game, right? It's called show business, not show art, not show entertainment.
Oh, yeah.
It's called show business. It is fundamentally a money-making operation. And if you do not make money, you do not stay on the air. So Hulu would not exist if they didn't have startup capital to get the rights to show certain shows right after it's shown on regular TV. That's a big money thing. And so that's the answer to that. Illegal streaming and Hulu are two different things.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. We talk. You know, I talk a lot about. You know, I pay for Crunchyroll. I'm a big fan of Crunchyroll, and so, yeah, I totally agree with you. We have another question here from and again, people, if you have questions for Brandon, writer of such comics as Transformers and Arcanium, as well as a writer on animated shows like Transformers, Rescue Bots, and the new version of Thundercats that debuted in 2011. Please put them either in the chat window. You can also deposit them into the Q&A application. So, all right. So that being said, then let's get this last question in before we get back to Brandon. And let's see, Brandon, this question I think is more so for me here. It's about scanlations. This person, Sandino Christian, saying, what's the problem with scanlations? I enjoy reading Naruto and completely support it, but I am shooting Naruto down by reading it on manga sites. Sandino, if you've heard any of my previous videos, then I'm kind of like Brandon here, where I get very animated on this. You're not supporting Naruto. You are not supporting Naruto at all. When you say you completely support Naruto, what do you think that means if you're reading the Naruto manga via scanlations? Naruto right now can be read and enjoyed, as I do, for 99 cents an issue, or for $20 for a year, or for $2.99 a month on any of the various mobile systems and/or directly on ShonenJump.com. You can do all of that. They're a competitor of ours, but I support creators that I appreciate, and supporting them means that you pay for the right to enjoy their work. And this is something I talk about a lot. I feel as if with the younger generation, this is part of the reason why I created MyFootprint.com and Saturday AM and all the lines that we have. I feel like the young generation that we have in the last 15 years, you guys are used to getting content for free. And content must be paid for. And so, as Brandon indicated, certainly there's questions, and I do not have sympathy for companies that do not embrace the digital landscape that we live in to figure out ways to reach their audiences, because it's never been easier to reach an audience than it is today. But that being said, though, if you are a fan of material and you support the material, supporting it means paying for it. And whether or not you feel like it's worth paying that amount is another story. But at the same time, you're only truly supporting something when you're paying for it. If you're not paying for it, you're not supporting it. You're exploiting it.
Absolutely.
That's the situation there. So let's move on. Jose, I do see your question. Excellent question. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to take Brandon forward and now discuss his, which actually will tie into your question a little bit, Jose. So hold on. So Brandon, now, so you did animation. You did a couple of shows. Correct me if I'm wrong. You did Transformers Rescue Bots.
Yes.
Thundercats, and then do you have anything else on the docket?
For television, no. Right now, I'm in the process of trying to break into Disney, Warner Brothers, and NBC all at the same time. So we'll see what happens. But right now, I'm not working on anything other than comic book projects.
Okay, all right. And so for the comic book projects, and then I then want to get to the documentary. But in the comic book projects, now tell everybody what you're working on currently in comic books, because you got a fairly diverse lineup of things that you're doing.
Okay, well. All right, let's start at the beginning. I've been working with Lion Forge Comics, which is based out of St. Louis, for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on a series called Roboy. I worked on another series called the Joshua Run. And coming in 2015, I completed my first nonfiction biography graphic novel of former WWF superstar Andre the Giant. And I actually had the opportunity to speak to his relatives and his daughter, and I think I was the only person yet to speak to his daughter in writing a biography. Yeah. So that was amazing, and that's going to be coming out sometime in either the end of this year or in early 2015.
That's excellent.
Working with an international company called Mecha Workshop, and they're doing a series called ARMORAUDERS, which is basically a giant robot mecha series along the lines of Gundam, or not quite like Evangelion, but it's giant robots piloted by humans, and the artwork is done by former IDW and Dreamwave artist Don Figueroa, yes, who happens to be doing the absolute best work of his career, and not a lot of people are seeing it. So I strongly recommend going to Facebook and looking up ARMORAUDERS, and it's ARMARAUDERS, ARMORAUDERS, like it sounds. It's absolutely astounding. I was hired to write some new material for them, so I came on board co-writing with the original writer, whose name was Dan Taylor, and I co-wrote issues 4, 5, and 6, and I'm writing a brand new series for them called Shadowfront, which is a Black Ops type story featuring giant mechs. So that's an amazing experience. I was also nominated for the Eisner Award for writing issue 6 of Watson and Holmes, and the Eisner Award is basically the Academy Award of the comic book industry. I did not win, unfortunately, but I was nominated for Best Single Issue or One Shot for Watson and Holmes number 6. So that's pretty much the gist of what I'm working on. There's a few more things in the pot, but I can't really talk about it.
So everybody, if you've been watching this, or if you're watching this on demand, you'll see that I put to the side some of the links where you can find ARMORAUDERS, as well as information on some of the other stuff that Brandon has worked on. That being said, again, for particularly some of the titles, the Lion Force titles that are available, he's worked on Roboy and such, you can find those on Amazon.com. You can also find them on Comixology.com, which also has Watson and Holmes. So please do check out some of Brandon's work. Watson and Holmes in particular, I'm a big fan of. It's a urban version of the Sherlock Holmes legend, and very, very cool looking comic. And then the Lion Forge comics also, they're very interesting. They're a digital company like My Footprint and Saturday AM, but they are focused on both original properties and licensed properties. So
yes,
great stuff there to check out. Hopefully we'll have an interview with the founders of that as well here soon, because obviously we have a lot of questions for them about their experiences in creating digital comics. Before we move on to the documentary, Brandon, what is your take on having seen the comic industry from the late 90s, early 2000s in terms of professions, and then now seeing it today with digital being such a pronounced part of the industry? What is your take on the movement to digital? Are you a fan of it? Do you think that it's better for everybody, or?
Okay, I'm absolutely a fan of digital. Now, with that said, I do personally prefer reading comic books like paper comics. However, there's a whole generation of people who have never held a paper comic in their life. And these people get all their information from their smartphones, tablets, and laptops. And they also should be able to read comics, in their leisure. Mm-hmm. So, personally, and I had this conversation 15 years ago, believe it or not. Back, I don't know if you remember, but I know a lot of people might not remember. There used to be a magazine called Wizard Magazine.
Yeah, of course.
And Wizard Magazine.
Wizard, yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I said, of course I remember Wizard, yeah.
Okay. There's somebody I think just joined us, and their mic is, there we go.
Yeah, I muted them, yeah.
Thank you. Wizard Magazine used to have a America Online dial-up disc that came with every issue for a while. Mm-hmm. And we used to just throw them around and break them. But what the industry should have done is when Wizard Magazine, which was an extremely high-selling magazine at one point, surprisingly, mm-hmm. when Wizard Magazine was giving out those AOL dial-up discs, CDs, they should have, at that time, included digital comics on those discs. Marvel and DC should have done that back then. Mm-hmm. They absolutely should have, because we missed out. And I think the industry missed out on a lot of growth because kids jumped and adopted the internet and the digital medium faster than anybody could have expected.
Absolutely.
And that generation of kids now only plays video games. That generation of kids only plays with mobile apps. They don't read comics. So I feel like we missed out on a huge, huge opportunity to get a new generation of comic book readers. Yeah. And that's where we are right now.
Totally agree. I totally agree. Like I said, that's a question we ask everybody. As I said before, with my sympathy for the animation companies and just companies in general, I think, to your point, I think when you have where things have gone in the digital realm, and you have a lot of companies. I basically make this comment a lot, and then we'll move on to the documentary. But I'm always reluctant to have sympathy for people, particularly big businesses, because no one seems to give a damn when the guy who makes the steel that goes on your car loses his job because it's shipped overseas to China. But when some businessman who has a job in a content business like music or movies or TV or anime or comic books, when they start to get worried because digital is encroaching on their business, and they had denied the chance to go digital, as you indicated with some of these companies, I have little sympathy for them because they had a chance to do the right thing. They wanted to keep the money the way it was because it was good money, and they wanted to keep it the way it was and control it. But they have no problem buying cheaper goods at Walmart than blocks, the average American who has a honest living, So yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I think the comic industry should have gone digital. They've been fortunate that Comixology worked the way that they work. Because if Comixology had been smart, they would have taken Marvel and DC apart, but they didn't. So let's stay with where we are then, and now let's move to, and I want to get to a question that Jose asked. So now you've done a documentary. You've discussed comics, we've discussed animation. You've done a documentary called Brave New Souls, and it's about the speculative fiction writers, which is a fancy way of saying fantasy and or science fiction writers who are African American or people of color at the very least. Jose Fabian asked, he said, what about the Latinos? And of course, Saturday AM, we have Latino creators, we have Asian creators, South Asian creators, Southeast Asian creators, and of course creators who are African American and or African, like White Manga, who is from Nigeria and has our biggest series, which is Apple Black. So, we have a very diverse lineup. In fact, our company is more diverse than Marvel or DC, because obviously, if you look at it on a ratio basis, it's just ridiculous how diverse we are in comparison to a company that's got so many employees and still has so few people of color and or women in key positions. But with that being said, you made this documentary specifically to address the question of here are these creators who people don't know that they're even out there. Like when you see a novel, you know, you didn't quite know whose name was on the novel. You know, like you just saw the name,
Right.
and you know, George R. R. Martin is a you know old white guy. He wrote Game of Thrones, and you think, okay, well that makes sense, you know, but that very well could have been someone that could have been a black woman, and it's like you just don't know, and so you decided to explore this. Talk us to exactly, first of all, what led you to want to do this documentary, and then how you did this documentary.
Okay, well, first things first, I want to address the Latino thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he was what he was referring to, but I can tell you now, particularly in Southern California, there's a lot of Latinos working in the industry. Mm-hmm. And depending on which, because when you say Latino, you're talking about what, like 40 different countries.
Right.
So depending on which country you're referring to, there's a lot of Latinos who already have industries in their home nations.
Right.
Whereas with African Americans, our home nation is the United States.
Right.
And so I think that on one hand, some Latino Americans, once again, it depends on where you're talking about, where they're from. Right. Because, you know, Telemundo, in a lot of cases, beats NBC, CBS, and, ABC.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So there's already, depending on who you are and where you're from, an entertainment industry for Spanish-speaking audiences.
Right.
So I wasn't trying to, discount or, ignore Latinos in any conversation, but I live in Los Angeles, which is a majority Latino city.
Right.
There's a lot of Latinos, again, like I said, working in the industry. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's just I'm not Latino. I cannot speak to those particular issues. Right. But I do know between Telemundo and Univision and all these other, huge, organizations and networks, there is significant Latino representation in certain places. Now, with that said, the reason I did Brave New Souls, first of all, was I know so many black science fiction and fantasy writers who have critical acclaim. Some of them have won worldwide awards for their work or have gotten worldwide recognition. People like Nnedi Okorafor or N.K. Jemisin. I know people like Jeffrey Thorne, who is a TV writer who worked on the TV show Leverage, and he wrote for Law and Order. And now he's working on a new show coming on TNT called The Librarians, which is a fantasy series.
Yep.
There's people like Vince Moore who wrote the Total Recall comic. There's Hannibal Taboo who won the Top Cow Talent Search. There's all these things. There's all these people who are completely ignored by the mainstream.
Right. And
not only that, what really blows my mind, looks like we have some of these people jumping back in. You might want to mute them.
Yeah, okay.
You have quite a few of these people who have, like, for example, I'll give you an example, right? There's a lot of black geeks out there who are always saying, oh, why won't Marvel do this? And why won't DC do this? Where's the black comics? We want black comics. We want black comics. Black, 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 black. But then there's all these black people making comics that they want, but they won't support them, even when they know they exist. So what I wanted to do was put out a documentary that showed these people what they look like, where they come from, what influences and inspires them.
Right.
And also what they've done, so that you can see it for yourself, so you can no longer say, we don't know they exist, which is a major issue, because we hear this a lot, particularly when it comes to hiring. They say, hey, well, we don't know where to find the black writers. Well, now you do.
Right.
Now you do. Now, the second question you asked me was how I did it. Basically, I just got tired of hearing excuses. I got tired of hearing black geeks basically bitch and complain about there not being enough black this and black that. Well, guess what? Now these people exist. We already know they exist. So I talked to, and these people were my friends, not all of them, because I don't even like everybody who was, interviewed, but because I don't need to like them, they don't need to be my friend, The point being is that I wanted people to see they existed. So luckily last year I was on a promotional tour with Lion Forge Comics, so I was, sent out to St. Louis and also Chicago, and I also go back to New York City because I have family there. A lot. I'm from the East Coast originally. So I got the opportunity to travel and meet a bunch of different creators who normally I would never have a chance to meet. And I just interviewed them. I mean, I got a camera, I got recording equipment, and I did it completely alone. I had no help. I shot this with my own money and my own time and my own gasoline, and it was a horribly difficult thing, but I managed to get it done.
How long did it take you from when you started getting interviews to when you were able to complete editing and stuff?
Altogether, it took about 18 months.
Okay, so it took about 2 years.
Almost. What wound up happening was I started shooting, and a lot of the people I asked, particularly bigger names, they didn't take me seriously because I guess they didn't think I was a big enough name.
Right.
So when it got done, a lot of those same people were like, oh, I guess you were serious.
Right.
And I'm like, I was serious the first time.
Right.
So, it wasn't like a direct, because it was in chunks. So I would work about 2 months at recording. Then a couple of months would pass by. Then I would work another 4 direct straight months recording and meeting people. And once I got about, God knows, maybe 100 hours of footage, I sent it off to an editor, and we got it done pretty fast because it premiered at EagleCon, which was at Cal State Los Angeles back on May 9th. So and we started editing probably toward the end of March, so we didn't have a whole lot of time. Right. So that was that.
Okay. So now, do you have that available? In other words, how can people find the video? Is it on Netflix? Is it on Hulu?
Okay, well, good question. First of all, it's available on Gumroad, and I'm going to pop the link into the chat right now so people can take a look at it. It's on gumroad.com, and there's some weird, crazy code behind that, so I don't know what that says, but I'll pop that in there right now. Yep. So it's on Gumroad, but I submitted it for Amazon Instant Streaming, so it takes about 60 days to work through their system, so I'm guessing probably toward the end of September you might see it pop up on Amazon Instant for download and instant streaming, so looks like around that time. Okay,
so people can check it out. I know the video itself is the documentary is about $7.99.
Yep.
Okay, which is a fantastic price if you guys want to purchase the videos. It's very cheap, so you certainly can't, shouldn't have that be an issue. But yeah, I think for me, what I found interesting about it was the fact that you were tackling something. I first of all love how you put that in the sense that we have there are a lot of African Americans and just people in general. I mean, as we see this in so many different places, but people who just ask these questions about, okay, well, hey, how come there aren't black people or women or Latinos or whoever producing this type of content, how come they're not there? And you're like, no, well, they actually are there. That's not to say that they get, like you said, they're not necessarily getting the respect or attention that they deserve, but they are there. You have to do some work to find them, but they're there.
Right, right.
And, so doing the documentary, I think, was fantastic. It's one of the reasons why we do interviews like this with the Q&A system, and is because the entire conceit is that, look, it's like if we can get more of these people engaged, then we can actually succeed at being able to get more people aware of the sort of talent that's available and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think the video, I'm sorry, is fantastic, but I think it's pretty good as well that you are addressing these things, because it's sad that that's the situation. So I guess with that being said, though, with that being one of the aspects that is there, what do you like how has it performed? Do you feel like you might want to do a sequel to it? What's your thoughts on that?
Okay. I've sold a few copies. It did not do as well as I hoped, because I was hoping to take the proceeds from the digital sales and turn it over to a DVD copy. And that didn't happen yet because the sales aren't where I like them to be. However, I am going to do a sequel starting sometime in 2015, whenever I get the money, and I'm going to, interview a bunch more people who I didn't get a chance to talk to the first time around, and a few people who suddenly decided to take me seriously now. So that's going to be interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that I did not take him seriously first, but yes, I will make myself available, Brandon.
But you weren't on the list of the people who didn't take me seriously. But no, I'll be happy to interview you. But no, but realistically, it's interesting because it's one of those things where you want to build with your community in LA and Hollywood, but some of the black people here are as hateful and dismissive towards you as the worst, racist white dude.
Right.
So it's a really interesting situation sometimes.
Yeah, I think Hollywood. I think just has a reputation, where it is. I mean, and I've been there many times. I've done a lot of business there. I have some friends in Hollywood, but I'm certainly not as familiar with it as you are.
Right.
But I would definitely say that I get that sort of thing. I get that sort of thing from a lot of people of various races and so forth. I get the impression that that's a lot of people.
Yeah, especially out in LA.
Yeah. So, we talked, we talked about doing, an opportunity for the people who've, attended this, and who would like to get, who've asked questions and so forth, who attended the Hangout. Where we could give them a free download code, so we'll certainly make that available for one lucky winner. So again, we're gonna go for about another 5 minutes. If you guys want to ask some questions to Brandon, get your questions in now. We will choose one of the people who've asked a question tonight to be the recipient of a free download, where you can check out the documentary and that'd be and certainly have a chance to check out what is a fantastic experience to see some other creators and get a sense of kind of what their struggles are. I'm a big believer that anytime you can hear what other creators have to deal with, it's a good experience, And so, again, Brandon's been very polite about providing us that opportunity. So, again, if you've got questions, get them into the chat window, get them into the Q&A. There was one person who did have a question in the Q&A, and unfortunately that got bounced off. So if you can resend that question in the Q&A, it was about Brandon's work with artists and how he does that. I'll ask that question from what I can remember if you don't resubmit it. But let me go to chat, where I know we had a question from Bayer Blount, who says, when you first started doing so she's saying when you first started doing a webcomic, but I don't know if you've ever done a webcomic, Brandon.
No, I have not.
Okay, so she's saying, how did you build your audiences? Were you ever shy? So I don't know if I don't know exactly who she meant that for. But let's talk about digital for a second.
Yeah.
You work with LineForge. LineForge's comics, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't they digital?
Yes. But they're not web-based, unfortunately.
But they're not physical, though.
No, not yet. But actually, they did just sign a deal with IDW for their for some of their books to be printed. So that did happen recently.
Okay.
Now, to answer the question, it's a good question in general, because I do panels at Comic-Con and WonderCon and a bunch of other big conventions around the country, and we get this question a lot about shyness. Now, the trick is, you shouldn't be afraid of putting your material on the market. However, you need to make sure that your material is so good that people want to come back. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, and here's the deal, some of the most talented people I know are terrified of putting their material, into the public spaces, mm-hmm. which you need to do. But the flip side is, some of the most ridiculously untalented people I've ever met are some of the most driven and ambitious folks in the world. So even though their stuff sucks, they're not true. Right. Yeah. So even though their stuff sucks, they're going to put it in your face, and that's where we have the problems we have with webcomics today. Not to say a lot suck, but there are some that are just absolutely horrible. But
I wouldn't go as far as that. I would just, but what I do try to tell a lot of the young people who are fans of ours is that, I'm a big believer in, first of all, I'm a big believer in speaking very truthfully to people. I think it's so disrespectful to think, because you think you're trying to not hurt them, and instead you're feeding nonsense to them so that they can believe nonsense, and then instead of exercising their true potential, go down a path that's not for them. And I tell people all the time, like, because we have this pilot manga group. I think many of the people here are from our pilot manga group, and it's a private group on Facebook for people specifically who want to join Saturday AM. And we're like, look, join this group. We're trying to help people become better creators. Whether or not you end up working for us or not, you know, at least you'll get a sense of, what things to look for in terms of your art skills, your writing skills, so on and so forth. But I tell people all the time, like, know your place. It's like, at a certain point, know your place. If you know that you're not the best artist, if you're drawing and you see other people who are so much better than you are, then just give it a shot at being able to start looking at other things. Like, why not try writing, and start writing articles for blogs and so forth. Or why not look at editing? Why not look at lettering or coloring or graphic design or a host of other things that can get you involved in the industry that you love, which should be what you want. But at the same time, though, doesn't send you down a path where you are trying to do something that clearly is not something you're going to succeed at. And I'm a big believer in that, because it's like, life, as you and I know, because I think you just turned 40 and I'm 40, and
right.
It's like, hey, life is too short. It's like life is too short to go down paths that are not built for you. Try it, but once you realize that that's not for you, once you hear enough of that, move on to other stuff that you can do, because the potentials are huge for everybody. But
yes.
Anyways, we have several questions coming in, so let's get to those. Let's start with Kinshaw Mashad. I'm sorry. Real quickly, back to the line 4, and we get these questions. So they're doing their comics right now are only available on Comixology and Amazon. Right
at this second, right. But very shortly, they're going to be print versions published through IDW.
Through IDW. How does that, just because I'm curious, and obviously, again, we've got so many fans who want to get into this space, how does that impact, does that impact your payment structure? Would you say
Well, I don't know that, because I'm only a hired gun. I know nothing about their internal financial operations.
Well, I meant in terms of, so traditionally the way it works is, you get royalties. Is that, but those are traditionally based off of print comics. Is that
right?
If that's different, or again, is that just something that's right now outside of the realm of what you're currently exposed to?
I do not get royalties at all. No.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, well, fair enough. Let's get to these questions. Then we've got a question from Kinshaw Mashad, who asks, "When did you decide that writing and what would you be?" This is a great question. What would you be doing if comics didn't work out?
Well, can you repeat the first half of that? I'm sorry.
So the first half, you've answered this before, but he just said, what was it that inspired you to write and create comics? When did you decide that?
Okay, what inspired me was when I was a kid. I was born in 1974, so I'm part of the Star Wars generation. We saw Star Wars when it was in the theaters originally, all of them, the original ones, I should say. So I also was a big fan of Star Trek. My grandfather and me, we used to watch it all the time. So in the 80s had this boom of science fiction and fantasy cinema. Some of it was awesome and some of it was not so awesome, but we all watched all of it because we were so happy to get a science fiction or fantasy thing. Yeah. Which is kind of different than now where people are kind of spoiled. But back then, you were happy when you got The Last Starfighter. You were happy when you got The Never-Ending Story or The Dark Crystal or The Goonies or any Indiana Jones movie or the first Batman movie in '89. Okay. So all that stuff contributed to me wanting to create this stuff. I mean, it changed my life back then, and it still influences me today.
So what would you be doing if not comics?
Probably teaching, because I was a New York City public school teacher, and I was doing that for about 6 years before I decided to move to LA.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay in school. All right, so let's go to the next one. It's Brandon Grisbon. Again, Brandon, I'm sorry about that. Brandon asks, what, in your opinion, is the most compelling aspect of comics in regards to the storytelling?
Excellent question. I think that the fact that you can marry words and pictures together to create something completely new and different every single time. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think in the United States, and I shouldn't say this with everybody, but I don't really think we've gotten to what comics can achieve yet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because every now and then, maybe once a generation, someone comes along and pushes it a little bit further. And then for the next 20 years, nothing happens. Case in point, like you look at the 60s, and then here comes Stan Lee and the Marvel generation, and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Joe Simon and all those guys, right? And they moved the needle a little bit, because they made their superheroes a little bit realistic, right?
Mhm.
Then 20 years after that, you got the 80s with the dark stuff with, Alan Moore and Frank Miller and Howard Chaykin and, cats like that. And then recently you get like the new generation, like the Brian Michael Bendises and the Jeff Johns, who kind of look backwards more than they look forwards. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, I think that we could achieve so much more with comics. And, you read a book like Persepolis or Mouse, or you read something like Warren Ellis's Planetary, and you see where things can kind of go, and you're like, wow. And then sometimes I feel like we move backwards a little bit in the superhero genre. So to answer your question, I'd say that the limitless possibilities of visuals in comic books is really compelling. There are things you can do in a comic book page you can't do anywhere else, Yeah. And I just think it's one of the greatest things mankind ever invented.
Yeah, the thing that when cartoons were on your and I era, in the late 70s, early 80s, they were so different than what they are today, but they were also so much more magical, I think, because it literally was the imagination, things that you just couldn't see in live action.
Right.
But then in comic books, the line that you hear a lot is that the comic book is a Hollywood blockbuster movie every issue, right? They have unlimited budget. They can send a character into space. So that's, like you said, that's what makes it so astonishing. The comic book is that it just offers so many possibilities. Let's see some more questions here from Jose Fabian. Asks, when it comes to writing, how do you create a world that's different from this world, like a fantasy? So in other words, how do you come up with worlds that are different? Do you do research? Do you where does the inspiration come from to create whole new worlds?
Okay, what I do usually, right, is let me go back a little bit. I have a background in sociology. Mm-hmm. My undergraduate degree is in sociology. Okay. So I tend to look at the world from a very pragmatic perspective. I also like to look at history and how it influences every moment today, because I used to be a history teacher when I was teaching. Mm-hmm. So with that said, I tend to approach a lot of my world building from the perspective of what's going to happen on an economic and a political level. Because if you don't have the economics and the politics of your future world, or whatever world it is, it doesn't have to be the future, it's not going to make sense. One of the reasons why, for example, Game of Thrones is so incredibly popular as a book series first, then as a cable series, is because the world politics and the economics are clearly delineated. You know from the first episode what this political structure of that world is. And even with Star Wars, you have a political structure in place that's explained. Same thing with Star Trek. The same thing with Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, Stargate. Mm-hmm. All these things, the one thing they have in common is their socio-political situations are clearly defined. And everything that's been great, it builds from that core. So when I create, I tend to look at, okay, what's going on politically and what's going on economically. Like, how are people eating? How are people working? What's the social structure like? What's the stratification like? Is there an upper class? What's that like? What's the middle class like? What's the lower class like? All that stuff matters, because if you don't do that, it's not going to make any sense.
That's pretty powerful. I like that. So yeah, you got to get into the actual makeup of the world, and I would suggest, possibly from what you're saying, that if you're not taking into account the things that we as African Americans, Latino Americans, but as minorities basically, Chris Rock has this great line about how, and again, I hate that, I know, like I said, some people be listening to this, they'll be like, well, that's not true, but it is true. It's like, white people really don't have to be multilingual. But when you're black and you want to succeed, you have to be multilingual. You have to be bilingual. You have to be able to talk in the black world. You have to be able to operate in the white world. And I think, to your point, when you're talking about communication and creating a world, you have to understand. You have to be able to set up a situation where you can be the outsider looking in, right? And it'll really create that sort of fishbowl effect, and that allows you to create that world. So Sandino Christian asks, Brandon, have you ever written for an artist, and if you did, how did you go about communication?
What do you mean, written for an artist?
Well, I'm saying you obviously have written for an artist,
Right.
But when you write for an artist, how do you handle the communication to the artist?
Okay, I see what you're saying. All right.
Marvel style scripts.
Right. I tend to write I don't do the Marvel style because the Marvel style actually makes more work later. I usually write in full script style, which means I describe every panel briefly. If you ever look at any scripts of Warren Ellis, that's the style I write in. I basically follow his style with slightly more description because Warren Ellis is known to give very open instructions. They're not like hardcore explaining everything.
Right.
And I think that the artist needs to have the ability to make up stuff. I'm not one of those writers that sits over the artist's shoulder and is like, you got to do it this. Every single little tiny thing has to be this way. I don't think it does. I think that if you communicate the visuals properly and things look the way they're supposed to look,
right,
you can leave it up to an artist to be dynamic, to maybe do a different angle, to make it bigger than you thought. If you don't do that, you're going to destroy the book.
So, all right. So then, that's interesting about the Marvel style. Cause I do think that's interesting about that because the Marvel style has certainly worked for some people, and Warren Ellis and Alan Moore have those full scripts, so it's a different process.
Right. Well, Warren Ellis the thing about Warren Ellis is he doesn't over-describe everything. Alan Moore describes every little thing in the shot, literally everything.
Yeah.
It's like ridiculous.
No, it is. It's amazing. I love it, but I get your point. So last, it's just a statement from one of our creators, Beverly Toole, who's the creator of Catheros, The Shattered World, and she's also one of our female creators and our only African American female creators, which is like a unicorn. I rarely see them in comic books. But Beverly's an amazing creator, one of our top artists. She wrote it. She wanted to write and tell you that she wanted to thank you for taking steps in creating the documentary. She's seen the trailers on YouTube. It's helping her become more aware of so many other creators of color, and you are a mountain of encouragement for her. So she wanted to thank you for that.
Well, you are welcome, and keep going. Please keep going. Keep creating.
Beverly, I hope you heard that. Keep creating for Saturday AM. All right, so Brandon, that's it. I think we've got all the questions in. So again, what we'll do, everybody, is I'll speak to Brandon. We will select a person to communicate it tonight via this particular chat, and then we will post the information on our Facebook fan page, which you can find at facebook.com/Saturday AM/. We'll also post this on our Saturday AM blog, which is at www.saturday-am.com, and you'll find our blog there. Select the blog, and we'll have an entry there where we do talk about this great chat with Brandon. We also have an interview with Brandon coming up, which we'll have on the website soon, and we'll post the information about both where you can buy the DVD for this, or the digital download for this documentary, Brave New Souls. I highly recommend you guys watch it if you have any desire whatsoever, as Beverly just indicated, to be a creator, whether you are a woman, whether you are from another country, whether you are a young white kid who has no connections into the industry whatsoever, or whether, of course, you are a person of color. I highly recommend the documentary because inspiration is all about finding the inspiration and the power to put yourself forward. As Brandon said earlier, people sometimes who have no talent seem to have all the passion in the world, and people who have lots of talent seem too frightened to step out. And you have to step out and be willing to take the risk of embarrassment and of encouragement and things like this, where you have documentaries that talk to people who talk about those experiences that they had. This is the sort of thing that we need to see more of. And so hats off to Brandon for making the documentary. Again, we will make the link available on our website so you can find it readily. We'll promote it in upcoming issues of Saturday AM as well as on our website. And then likewise, one of you will receive a free download of the documentary. And we hope that you not only watch it and love it, but we hope you then tell your friends to check it out as well, so that Brandon can be inspired himself to make more documentaries in this vein. So again, let's thank Brandon Easton for taking time out of his very busy schedule to chat with us. Brandon, really appreciate it.
Man, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
No, it's no problem at all, man. Again, everybody, this is Saturday AM. We are a digital publishing company called myfootprint.com, which is myfutprint.com. We feature creators and concepts literally from around the world. Many of you are familiar with Apple Black, which is one of the biggest online webcomics in the world, certainly from a manga standpoint, and it's created by a Nigerian named White Manga, who is exclusive to Saturday AM. We also have creators like Beverly Toole, Mariel Villarreal from Mexico, David Yoon, Andrew Sterling out of Jamaica/Canada, and many more creators, Raymond Brown, Wally Win from Vietnam, many more creators from around the world. You all have embraced us this last 7 months, and we've grown significantly, so much so that many of you are subscribing to our comic every single day. We really appreciate all the support you guys give to us. We cannot thank you enough for it, and please continue to support us. If you don't subscribe to us, it's only $5. You get 100-page issues or more every single issue. It comes out every 2 weeks, and you get 20 of those a year for just $5. Of course, you can buy back issues at any time, which we also have at discounted rates. But more importantly, supporting our creators by buying T-shirts and or prints that they have just makes it an amazing experience and helps us support and keep them active. Likewise, this particular Q&A session that we did with Brandon Easton, we do it every Saturday. So if you want to check out some amazing voices in the world of creation, both in terms of 3D sculpting, comic creating, webcomics, anime, manga, as well as obviously video production, then you want to check it out. It's of course free. It's hosted on our YouTube channel, which you can find on demand at a later date. Just Google Saturday AM and YouTube channel. But more importantly, we have creators like Brandon Easton who deserve to be heard by people who are fans of great content. Brandon is a fantastic writer. We hope you seek his work out on Comixology.com and or via Lineforge or Amazon.com. Check out Brandon's work and help support him as well as a creator. Thanks again. Next Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have, I believe it's Raymond Brown, who will be doing cover for issue number 15. He's the creator of our exclusive manga, Bully Eater, and he, of course, is just an amazing voice in the world of webcomics. Please show up next Saturday and support Raymond, and we have some great questions lined up for Raymond. He's got some big things to talk about in regards to Saturday Wars, which is our gigantic Kickstarter we'll be doing. That's going to be a crossover of various webcomics from around the web. Thanks again, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next Saturday. And again, keep supporting Saturday AM. Thanks. Take care, Brandon.
Take care. Thank you.
All right.